afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us once again. So this week we are having our fourth session of the Media and Journalism webinar. And today we have a wonderful speaker from Thomson Reuters Foundation. Antonio, thank you so much for joining us. And so we will be learning more about Thomson Reuters Foundation and its programs and activities. But before we introduce our presenter, I would like to thank Yazid Kameldian, our host for the Media and Journalism webinars. He's doing an amazing job, and thank you so much, Yazid, for joining us today again. So you have the floor.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mehmet. Antonio, welcome to our webinar series. So far, this is the fourth one. So far, we've talked to freelance journalists. We've looked at the role of religion in society. And we also looked at conflict journalism. We've signed in with a journalist from the Ukraine and another journalist who had to flee Turkey because of safety issues. So participants, welcome. This is the fourth session. And we have Antonio Zapula online. He's the Chief Executive Officer of the Thomson Reuters Foundation, the corporate foundation of the Global News and Information Services Company. He's going to do a presentation with us, of course, to tell us more about what they do. Now, Antonio is the founder of Openly, the world's first platform dedicated to fair, accurate, and impartial coverage of LGBT plus stories with global distribution through the Reuters Wire service. And in 2018, he ranked first in the outstanding list of third sector LGBT plus executives published by the Financial Times. And in 2017, he was named a European Young Leader by Friends of Europe and was awarded the Talented Young Italians Award by Italian Chamber of Commerce in 2016. So Antonio's got a lot of experience and quite an impressive CV. He has also worked as the Director of Communications and COO at the Thomson Reuters Foundation and executive producer at Bloomberg Television in charge of news, factual programming and documentaries for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, developing award-winning TV series. So that's a lot of information about Antonio. And I'd like our participants to fully engage, of course, as they have been today as well. Take full advantage of having someone with a lot of experience, with us. Participate, ask questions, of course, post your questions in the chat. And as we've done before, we open the line and, you ask the question. So, Antonio, you've got a presentation. Please feel free to go ahead, share with us the good news.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a presentation about the work that we do at the Thomson Reuters Foundation. So I'll try to share my screen. We don't tend to use Zoom much. But tell me if you actually see this presentation on my screen.
Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
So I'll try to make a presentation mode. Okay. So as you rightly said, we are the Thomson Reuters Foundation. So we are the corporate philanthropic arm of Thomson Reuters. So I'll start by showing you a very short video of the work that we do, and then I'll go into more details, especially looking at the type of journalism that we do, which I guess will be the most relevant part for this audience. So bear with me as I'll show you the video.
COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
So much wealth created, juxtaposed with the suffering in this country that is simply unacceptable.
The pandemic disproportionately affected women.
The single most important thing that's got the attention of the world is climate.
Net zero.
Net zero.
Net zero emissions.
Press freedom is not just about journalism. What we're seeing is death by 1,000 cuts of our democracy.
You are watching our correspondent being arrested by state police.
Free and independent journalism is our greatest ally in combating misinformation and disinformation.
A safer social media is possible. My fear is that without action, divisive and extremist behaviors we see today are only the beginning.
This is a unique moment in time. We are facing a climate emergency. Global inequalities are deepening. Trust is declining. Civil liberties are being eroded. People, businesses, and governments are trying to keep pace with a deeply polarized and fast-changing world. But they can't do it alone. That's where we come in. At the Thomson Reuters Foundation, we use our unique combination of legal and media expertise to empower the world's most informed professionals so that their decisions can have a positive impact on people, society, and the environment. We work with journalists, civil society, business, and governments to advance media freedom, foster inclusive economies, and promote human rights. We believe societies should be free, fair, and informed. That's why we focus on socioeconomic inclusion, strengthening ESG frameworks, and ensuring access to accurate, independent, and trusted information. Through our news, media development work, free legal assistance, and convening initiatives, we help safeguard truth, justice, and strong institutions. The world may be in flux, but together, we can shape a prosperous planet where no one is left behind.
So that's a very short video that gives you a sense of the work that we do at the foundation. And as I said, the work that we do it's pretty large and uses a combination of media and legal interventions. So this is a very quick overview into who we are and what we do. We are, as I said, the corporate independent charity of Thomson Reuters. We are registered in the UK and in the US, and we work to advance media freedom, to foster more inclusive economies, and to promote human rights. That's because we believe that the media and the law, which are effectively the two engines of the work that we do, are essential to foster a free, fair, and informed societies. And those words that we've chosen are not obviously random. You know, a society cannot be functioning and functional if it's not free, if it's not fair, and if it's not informed. And information, obviously, as we know, plays a significant role in making sure that society is fair and is free. And we use, as the video said, the combined power of media and legal interventions, which is what makes the foundation pretty unique. We've been established in 1992. We have more than 150 staff in more than 17 countries around the world. So this is a breakdown of our pillars of work. Our media freedom portfolio is quite large, and it really focuses on a number of key projects, 3 programmatic areas within the programmatic area of work. The first one is called Media for Democracy and Development. And it's a rich portfolio of training and mentorship and capacity building programs for journalists, mostly in emerging countries, in the global south, and in countries that are opening up to democracy or where democracy is at risk. So at the moment, for example, we do extensive work in Africa, we do extensive work in Eastern Europe. And those are interventions that range from a 1-week-long training or a 3-year-long consultancy within newsrooms that are at risk, where we look at their commissioning processes, we look at the sustainability funding processes. We effectively can embed ourselves into a newsroom for a long period of time, making sure that when we leave, the newsroom is in a much better shape, both from an editorial standpoint, operationally, but also in terms of sustainability, because we believe there is a very strong link between sustainability and the independence of media, especially if you look at countries that are at risk of monopoly, or where oligarchs, for example, that are associated with governments control a lot of advertising spend. So we really take sustainability at the foundation pretty seriously. Another pillar that is emerging within that program is the safety of journalists, which for us is online safety, so cybersecurity, for example, physical safety, of course, but also legal safety. And we'll talk about that in a moment, because our second pillar of that program is in fact called Defend Media Freedom. And this is really a combination of interventions that span from legal research to academic research, to pro bono support to journalists and newsrooms that are actually at risk of being silenced. So pretty much defending media freedom, as the word says. It's a very large and emerging program. We launched last year something called the Legal Network for Journalists at Risk, and is a partnership between ourselves, the Committee to Protect Journalists, and Media Defense, where we effectively established a network of networks that can provide a single entry point for journalists, independent journalists, and independent newsrooms in the world that are at risk of legal threats. You can find out more about by visiting the website medialegalhelp.org. And finally, the last pillar of our media freedom proposition is called Strengthening the Future of Journalism. And it's essentially our research, which is conducted by the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism at the University of Oxford, which many of you will know for a number of publications, and particularly one publication, which just came out a couple of weeks ago, which is called the Digital News Report, which is a bit of a benchmark in monitoring and assessing digital consumption trends when it comes to journalism. The second pillar of our work is inclusive economies, is our second strategic pillar within the foundation. And here we really look at mostly the S in ESG. So the criteria that has to do with social implications, which is very much an emerging trend within the emerging trend that is ESG. And with the S, we look mostly at the issue of fair labor. We have done historically a lot of journalism and legal work and even capacity building of journalists when it comes to modern day slavery. We folded this initiative into our Just Transition and S in ESG portfolio. Just Transition, some of you might be familiar with the concept, is effectively a framework that's been created in terms of naming by trade unions, and is effectively a framework that wants to ensure that as we progress towards more green, more sustainable consumption models, we actually don't forego important labor rights. And at times, actually, it's a question of unintended consequences, but it's something that we're taking very seriously. We're working with a number of other organizations in strengthening the framework of just transition. We also look at responsible business models. Again, a lot of work when it comes to engagement with the private sector, when it comes to supply chain and labor rights, but also really looking at the business implications when it comes to human rights. And this has been really spearheaded by a number of legislative measures that have been passed through in the UK, in the EU, especially with mandatory due diligence. So effectively, it's a pillar of work which allows us to engage with the private sector to shape and change business behaviors. And then the emerging pillar within our strategic focus of inclusive economies is the one of data and digital rights, which spans from privacy, surveillance, and algorithm discrimination. The last pillar of our work is around human rights, which kind of encompasses everything that I just said, but in particular, we have a specific focus on, as you will imagine from the first two pillars, on freedom of speech and expression, climate, which we see very much as a human rights issue. We've done extensive also legal research, for example, when it comes to the issues of climate refugees and the issue of data, digital rights, but also forced labor, women, and LGBT+ rights. So this is pretty much our strategic approach. Everything that we do is really powered by legal and media interventions, which make our approach pretty unique. And everything feeds, as you can see, in these three key priority areas for us, which are media freedom, inclusive economies, and human rights. Now, how we do this type of work is through our services. That's how we call this, if you want, deploy mechanisms internally. So we have a newsroom within the foundation of 45+ journalists who report for an editor-in-chief that reports into myself. So we are a separate newsroom from Reuters, but we also share our content on the Reuters Newswire. We do a lot of media development work. I talked about it briefly when I was discussing the first pillar of our media freedom proposition. And then we do a lot of pro bono legal assistance. We run the biggest pro bono legal platform that connects lawyers that want to provide free legal assistance to NGOs and social enterprises around the world that need free legal assistance. And I'll give you a sense of the scope of that work, which is quite extensive. And then we do a number of convening initiatives. And those convening initiatives range from close invite-only convenings between, for example, private sector CEOs, but also labor rights leaders or NGOs that work in specific areas of our work, mostly around the issue of inclusive economies, but can also be private gathering between, for example, NGO leaders that work in the area of media freedom or lawyers that work in the space of defending media freedom. Some of them, most of them are actually closed door, Chatham House rules invite-only events where we convene these different parties and we ask them to share best practice in confidence. And then there is one big event, which is a public event, which is called the Trust Conference. You can find more information on trustconference.com. I'll tell you more throughout this presentation. Is our flagship annual event, which really brings together everything that we do at the organization, and in fact has a focus on media freedom, inclusive economies, and human rights under the banner of strengthening free, fair, and informed societies. Internally, we call the Trust Conference the Festival of the Foundation, because it's really where everything programmatically comes together. Just to give you a sense of how large our work is, as you can see, Trust Law, for example, which is our pro bono legal network, has more than 5,000 members, which result in about $40 million of pro bono legal assistance generated every year. So we act very much as a leverage within the legal community. 20,000 plus journalists are the journalists that we trained. We train on average 1,000 journalists a year in more than 9 countries, and we report from the ground from more than 70 countries. This is at the moment the geographical spread of our newsroom, which is powered, as I said, by 45, in fact, now correspondents and more than 200 stringers and freelancers around the world. So a very large newsroom, and I'll tell you a little bit more about our editorial focus. For context, this is a bit of a preview that you are seeing, is our new editorial product. This will be launched on September the 28th. So actually you are among the first people that see the logo and the mock-up of the homepage. If you go on context.news, you will be able to find some basic information about the new product. You can register your interest if you want to find out a little bit more. But essentially, we are changing our news proposition, and we are creating a new brand called Context. The focus is only on 3 main areas of focus, and these areas of focus really want to encapsulate what we see and what we think are some of the world's biggest issues right now in terms of journalism, but also with an impact on people, society, and the environment. And those 3 issues, as you can see from the mock-up of Context, are climate, what we call inclusive economies, and the impact of technology on society. Context has already launched its YouTube channel. We basically rebranded our existing YouTube channel, and we're already releasing videos that will give you a sense of the type of content that you could expect on Context. But the name itself gives you a sense of the type of product that we're building. We are effectively positioning our journalism as a second read. So the idea is that readers will go to the New York Times, the Washington Post, whatever they read, the Guardian, and then they will come to us to basically get the context of what they're reading. The idea is to take big global stories and really dissect them by exploring the juxtaposition between these 3 focus areas that we have chosen, but also looking at geographical nexus between these stories. An example of a story that we ran even prior to the launch of Context was when the conflict in Ukraine obviously exploded. We were immediately reporting on the angle of the food crisis and the repercussions for agricultural commodities, mostly in countries such as Lebanon and countries such as the Yemen. So the idea is that we will be able to tell you a different side of the story when the story happens, as opposed to when the news cycle has run its course and journalists are frantically looking for a new angle to keep the story afloat, or when the former prime minister here in the UK, Boris Johnson, decided to phase down diesel cars much earlier than anticipated. We were able to tell a different story. We were able to tell the story of those cars actually landing in Nigeria and other African countries. So looking, if you want, at the other side of the story as the story happens, precisely for the reason of giving you context. And for context, we are prioritizing what we call purpose-driven professionals. So professionals who work or have a strong interest in the 3 areas of coverage, so climate, inclusive economies, and tech and society, and professionals who can really go back to work and take the information that they read and actually make it to fruition. So being able to take informed decisions and ideally driving change through the content that is provided to them. This is just a sense of the stories that we would normally write. At the moment, as I said, we are shifting everything into the 3 main areas of focus. But some of the most recent stories, as we prepare for the launch of Context, we're looking at crypto donations in Ukraine. We talked with executives at Bitcoin, Polkadot, Solana, and we saw, we reported that more than $110 million were donated to Ukrainian cryptocurrencies. And again, we were able to really give it different side of the story. We're looking obviously at the fact that it's great that more than $100 million were donated to Ukraine, obviously at a crucial time, but we're also able to explore the risks. Obviously, cryptocurrencies are very volatile, and even the risk that Russia could use cryptocurrency, itself to actually avoid sanctions. So again, trying to give always different perspectives through our journalism. The second story is a story I love. It's about Lebanon. It's a very recent story. It's a superb investigation that we ran, which found that at least $250 million in UN aid that were intended for refugees living in Lebanon were actually swallowed up by banks that were selling the local currency at very unfavorable rates. So effectively leveraging the US dollar exchange to the Lebanese lira to actually make a profit for money that were actually intended for refugees. The story actually went viral on Reddit on a channel that had more than 26 million subscribers, and it was also picked up by the Telegraph in the UK. Third story is actually a video that you can find on the Context channel, and it's a fascinating story that I watched several times because I actually think it's absolutely enlightening. It's a story about biodiversity, and a couple of scientists and experts that have been able to put a price tag to an elephant, and the price tag to an elephant has gone up to $20 million. And the reason why they put a price tag to the elephant is because the elephant has a significant function in cleaning up the rainforest and actually making the rainforest more fertile. And the idea is to actually put a price tag to an animal that is in fact much higher than the price tag that someone would pay to kill an elephant for ivory, and trying to change the narrative from a different monetary perspective, and which is really fascinating. It's a fascinating video that you can find on Context right now. And then again, stories that have to do with fair labor. As I said, this is pretty much one of the key topics for us. It's a story that took us to Thailand and Thai prisoners being forced to make fishing nets for private companies in prison, including some fishing nets that were actually exported into the US. The story had huge impact worldwide. The Department of Corrections has issued an order now in Thailand prohibiting forced labor in prisons. The story was also picked up in major US outlets. And then, the story got moving, and now there are actually significant checks happening in Thai prisons as a result of that story. And then a UK story, a story about, again, I talked about the impact of tech on society. This is an exclusive story that we ran. We use freedom of information inquiries to effectively being able to document that half of London councils were using an AI software that was actually linked to human rights abuses for the Uyghur community in China. The story became pretty big. Effectively was picked up by an MP in the UK who took this story as evidence to the Foreign Affairs Committee, and now the government is officially reviewing the situation, and this technology has been put on hold. I think you mentioned Openly at the beginning of your introduction. Openly is our other platform, which is already up and running, has been up and running for a number of years. You'll find it at openlynews.com. And Openly is our LGBT news platform, and it's powered by our newsroom. And it's a serious journalism that really looks at the many issues affecting the LGBT community around the world. It's we cover features, we cover politics, we cover human rights related issues that affect the LGBT community. And in the past year, we actually experimented with Openly and developed a very strong social presence. And that's actually quite an interesting story, because if you go on openlynews.com, which is effectively the website for Openly, you'll find the type of good journalism and serious journalism, investigative reporting that you will want to read. But then we take that message and we really package it in a very, very different format on platforms such as TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. I guess the most dramatic in change is our TikTok channel. We have two videographers that report weekly on the Openly channel, and it's been incredible to see the growth of that channel. So some of the stories are directly linked to our reporting, others are not. The videographers are free to experiment new formats and new topics that obviously are related to issues affecting the LGBT community. But it's been a great experiment for us to use a different storytelling mechanism to reach very, very different communities of LGBT consumers and readers of news around the world. We've been nominated for a number of awards. Definitely check out our social channels, because especially the TikTok channel is pretty groundbreaking. And some of the stories that we reported on openly, as I said, very, very serious story. The Brunei one perhaps is the one that some of you actually will remember, because a couple of years ago, Brunei spoke of these plans to implement Sharia laws and effectively condemn homosexuality with stoning and death by stoning. The story was published, so we broke the story. The story went absolutely viral in 24 hours, from Britain to the United States to really around the world. George Clooney got involved. There was a massive boycott in London at assets and hotels that were linked to the Sultanate of Brunei. Brunei effectively made a U-turn a month later, and they haven't introduced Sharia law, actually death by stoning under Sharia law for the homosexual, the gay community, LGBT community. In Uganda, similar story. We broke the story of plans to reintroduce a bill to parliament that was would impose death penalty for gay sex. The story, again, because of our distribution, went, made significant waves, and actually, as a result, really triggered the outrage of a lot of international aid donors to Uganda. And again, there was a U-turn as a result of our story. Other stories about LGBT rights in Poland, you'll be familiar with for example, the gay-free town, the gay area towns in Poland. The story effectively ended up on the table of the dedicated EU commissioner. And another story that we wrote during the COVID pandemic was a story about the hormone shortages that was affecting the trans community in South Africa because of the disruption in supply chain. And we talked about the risk of the transgender community effectively acquiring testosterone online that wasn't safe. So again, when the COVID pandemic was happening, we were talking about very different angles that were resulting from the disruption in supply chain. Media development is another big area of work for us. I spoke about it earlier. This is just an overview of the type of work that we do. Again, it's very global work. In 11 languages, more than 35 news consultancies 2 years ago, last year, and training courses pretty much all over the world. Our media development team is one of the busiest ones, and they actually do work in areas of the world that are not particularly fun to be in, and there are a significant risk, because we do train those who stand for the truth in areas where the truth is not particularly welcome. Our legal program is called Trust Law. I was mentioning it earlier. Every year we leverage about $40 million of pro bono legal work. It tallies up to just about $220 million since the inception of Trust Law, which was launched 10 years ago. We have 1,000 law firms, which is the equivalent of 120,000 legal experts, more than 5,000 NGOs, about 8,000 connections between legal teams and NGOs around the world since inception, pretty global, 175 countries, and more than 6,500 members when it comes to the overall composition between the lawyers and the law firms. And what we do with Trust Law, we provide free legal assistance to NGOs and social enterprises. And this assistance can be either operational, so we help civil society effectively scaling by saving legal costs and reinvesting that money into their work on the ground. So saving on an HR type of contracting or IP contracting, so significant operational needs that we effectively absorb, but also legal research. And the legal research perhaps is the most fascinating part of Trust Law, because we do work with law firms around the world to take an issue and effectively dissect the legal implications. And that research is then used by NGOs and social enterprises to propel their advocacy work. And just to give you an example of the type of work that we've done, we were able to change rape law in mainland China, making sure that character would not be admissible in court as evidence any further. We were able to ban conversion therapy on minors in the state of Illinois, which is one of the only 3 countries in the states where conversion therapy on minors is actually illegal. So the type of work that we do through Trust Law really encompasses a wide range on topics, and it's really, I would say, anchored around our 3 main areas of work. And then I mentioned the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism. That's been going on for 30 years. It's a significant program of the foundation. It's funded by the foundation. It's the only grant that we actually give to any organization, because we are not a grant-making foundation, but we do give grants to journalists as part of our work. But in terms of institutional grants, this is the only grant that we give every year, and we give it to the Reuters Institute for many years. And finally, Trust Conference. Trust Conference is our flagship event. As I was mentioning earlier, you can understand why the tagline is there: strengthening free, fair, and informed society. So it brings the whole notion of the type of work that we do at the foundation and packages it up into one event that really reaches out to our many different stakeholders. These are some of the speakers that are already confirmed for the event this year. The event is an in-person event in London on October 26 and 27. We got Christiana Mampour, some fantastic investigative reporters such as Elliot Higgins from Bellingcat. We'll be looking at issues that have to do with media freedom. So we have Irene Khan, who is going to be with us, but also some fantastic reporters such as Patricia Campos-Melos. And then we'll talk about the issues related to digital rights. So you might recognize, if you watch The Great Hack on Netflix, some of the key participants in that documentary, from Brittany Kaiser to Ravi Naik to Professor David Carroll. So it's going to be a fantastic 2-day convening in London. This is a bit of a preview over our program. You can find more information on trustconference.com. First day, as you can see, entirely dedicated to the issue of media freedom and digital rights. We'll open up with a panel featuring some brave frontline journalists. We'll look at photojournalism, content reporting from areas in conflict. We'll then look at the legal trends that are hampering media freedom. We look at how you can use open source journalism to investigate war crimes, in this case, obviously looking into the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And then we'll talk about digital rights. We'll look at digital rights in the metaverse, and then we'll conclude the first day with a conversation on the grey hack and the risks in terms of data and digital rights in the Web2 ecosystem. And then the second day takes us to our inclusive economies and human rights portfolio. If you want, we'll look at the green energy shift, at the issue of just transition, labor rights, and then at the S in ESG. And finally, we'll conclude on a panel with women's rights. And finally, I wanted to show you one of the products that we launched 3 weeks ago. It's called TRFilter. You can find more information at trffilter.org. Now, TRFilter is a free web application that we co-developed with Jigsaw, which is the non-profit arm of Google. And it tackles online harassment. And as the name implies, it is very much acting as a filter. It syncs with your Twitter account. So at the moment, the application is only available on Twitter. We worked very closely with Twitter to develop this. You use your Twitter account to log in, and it does identify abusive, potentially abusive content, and provides also, as you will see, I'll show you in a minute, a toxicity rating for the type of abuse that you might have received. And then it allows you to either completely ignore, block out this abuse, or to actually monitor it, and then to create a record of this online harassment that you have received as a journalist. You can report it to your newsroom, to your online safety managers, to lawyers, to academic institutions that are doing research in this space, and to prosecutors where the law allows you to actually do anything with this information. That's unfortunately the problem that we are facing. But I just wanted to give you a bit of a live demonstration of what this application can do. So I'll effectively pull out the live website of Filter. So this is what you see on trffilter.org. It does explain what the tool does. As I said, there is a very useful tool that you can watch, a useful video that you can watch. There's an FAQ. It does ask you to register. I'm already registered, so I'm signing in here. And as I said, for the this demo, I'm actually not using my personal account because, Luckily, I'm not at the receiving end of a lot of abuse, but I'm using our account for openly. So it's using a Twitter API to pull out the data. And as you can see, you land into this space where effectively it tells you that you have X amount of tweets that might be high priority because they might be harmful, potentially harmful tweets, and 18 of unknown priorities. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go back in time and create a report looking at the last month. And as you can see, it's loading up tweets, which are automatically blurred out. So you won't be able to see the tweets. I'm actually going to be adjusting the categories. I'm going to tell the tool that I only want to see likely harmful and potentially harmful tweets. And as you can see, it's slowly loading up the page, slowly because my internet is not particularly great where I am, but it does pull the data. And you can go back and you can actually personalize the range of time that you want to explore. Let's say you know that during a specific amount of time, you did face specific harassment and abuse, you can go and actually monitor that amount of time. And this is unfortunately the level of abuse that our newsroom gets on a daily basis because of the type of content that we actually produce. Okay, so I'm just doing the last 24 hours, and these are tweets that are potentially harmful. As you can see, they're blurred out, but you can choose to see them. And this is the type of abuse that you will receive. These are potentially harmful, so they're not certainly harmful. So it's a second layer of abuse that you will get. But obviously, the more toxic category is the one that is the most significant. What you can do when you find something that you find abusive, so you can either, as I said, decide to avoid all of this, or if you want to again identify specific abuse that you've seen, you can then create a report. And as you can see, I've selected 5 comments. It tells me that this is the type of toxicity that it represents. It tells me who the users are who produce this abuse. You can write the notes, you can report this abuse right away, and then it allows you to block all these accounts. So we just block them. We can hide the replies, and then we can download a PDF report that we can then take to our newsroom, we can take to our lawyers, we can effectively use to make sure that our Twitter account is being cleaned up. And then you can load your Twitter account, and these tweets that you just selected will be automatically filtered out of your Twitter accounts. And that's pretty much the end of my presentation. I'm more than happy to take questions from you and to start a conversation and a dialogue if you like.
Antonio, wow, that was such a comprehensive presentation. You basically took us through every department and everything you guys do. That was amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. I feel that I hope that Twitter starts promoting TRFilter as well, because imagine being able to clean up your Twitter account that easily, especially if you're a lobby group or an activist group, or even, well, obviously also a media group and a journalist, to have an app that could filter out all the potentially abusive comments and feedback. So well done to you guys in that. So did you say that has just launched, Antonio?
Yeah, we launched it about 3 weeks ago, and actually some of the uptake has been pretty phenomenal. We're looking at the stats yesterday. I mean, the stats are incredible. There is literally so many countries in the world. I think at the moment we have over 106 countries that have logged into the tool, even countries which are not necessarily English speaking. And it's pretty incredible. We weren't expecting this uptake. So there is definitely need for this tool. We are actually working right now to produce the Arabic version of the tool that should be launched next year. So there is clearly, unfortunately, a strong demand for this tool.
Well, participants, get the tool. while you can, while it's free.
No, it will always be.
It will always be free. Okay, good. So look, Antonio, we want to meet your presentation was very comprehensive, right? We heard from the foundation, we heard about the institute, we heard about the work in the field, but I'd like to meet participants where they are, okay? So many of our participants are journalists or aspiring journalists, and also many of them are from, as you called it, did you say emerging countries?
We say emerging economies in Global South.
Emerging economies in Global South, because you know the terminology often is like developing countries. That's how people often talk about.
No, we won't talk. We won't talk about developing countries.
Yeah, I'd like us to meet participants where they are, right? So, in fact, we already have some questions from participants. So, let's go to the chat, and then we can start off with those questions, and then of course we can look at you know, as we go along in the conversation, whatever else comes up. So I'm looking at the chat now, and you can basically unmute yourself and ask the question. So we can start with Rachel from Kenya. So I'd like to, if you do ask the question, just introduce yourself again and just say where you're phoning in from, and then you can ask the question. So the first question posted in the chat is from Rachel.
Okay. Hi again. For day 4, my name is Rachel Ndwati. I'm a broadcast journalist and digital entrepreneur, and very, very comprehensive presentation there by Antonio. And what I grasped was that the fact that there is an institute called the Reuters Institute of Journalists. I don't know whether I got that right. So I wanted to ask whether they offer capacity building initiatives for, you know, journalists in form of, you know, scholarships or grants or any other way in which you can empower journalists, especially from Africa.
Thank you, Rachel. So we do, so you got it right. It's the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism at the University of Oxford. It's a bit of a mouthful. The Reuters Institute works with mid-career journalists, and it offers scholarships to effectively come to Oxford and do research for about 6 months. But we do work with journalists all across the spectrum. So from journalists who want to specialize themselves on specific coverage areas, you know, we've done a lot of training, for example, in human trafficking, reporting women's rights, reporting LGBT rights. Actually, the foundation's second biggest team is in Kenya, is in Nairobi, and we do conduct a lot of journalism training work in Kenya. We ran actually a very successful LGBT reporting training. Kenya was an interesting country for us because there were conversations about decriminalization a couple of years ago, and we were working with journalists, you know, training them up in understanding that even if, for example, the issue of homosexuality is still illegal in Kenya, that doesn't authorize a journalist to brand a member of the LGBT community as a pedophile or a sinner or a devil worshipper, which were verbatim some of the language, some of the adjectives that were used in some of the local media. And then actually we did train also LGBT activists in Kenya, and then we trained them on how to effectively communicate with the media and engage the media, and making them understand that they were not necessarily enemies. They were trying to do their job at times in very difficult circumstances. And then we brought them together, and it was really, really phenomenal. And actually that program was so successful that we then scale it in India and in Poland, and we're now doing again similar training in Eastern Europe. So the answer is yes, we do work with journalists in Kenya. I would suggest that you keep an eye on our website. There is an email for general media inquiries, and you can just send your CV, say that you're interested, specify what type of training you might be interested in. Our training is always free. So it's definitely good to register your interest and be part of the community. We do a lot of opportunities. We offer a lot of opportunities for scaling up the knowledge and you know, give journalists the tools that they need. So we're very much always looking for new opportunities to engage with journalists.
Thanks, Antonio. Just to share, by the way, in 2015, I visited the Thomson Reuters Foundation office in Canary Wharf in London. I actually did one of your guys' workshops in London in 2015 in Canary Wharf. Are you based in that office, or are you based in Italy, Antonio?
Oh, no, I'm in Italy because I'm the only good thing that came out of COVID is remote working. So I'm working 4 weeks from Italy before taking time off. I'm based in London, in Great Canary Wharf, and we actually changed office, but we're just across the road, so we're still based in Canary Wharf, in a better office, but still in Canary Wharf.
Yeah, I remember it was such a big entry. Like you'd walk in, and it was almost like walking into this big building. It was something else. So thanks for answering to Rachel. And I think a web link, a website. I know that in the chat, Chemria posted a link to TRFilter. I think maybe Rachel, I guess also check out the website. Go online. I mean, you got the name right. Maybe just put in the name of the organization, and then the website would come up.
Our website is trust.org.
Trust.org. That's easy. That is so easy. Trust.org.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. So let's go now to Mercy. Mercy, if you can ask your question, just introduce yourself and please say where you're phoning in from. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mercy Achieng from Kenya. I'm a broadcast journalist. So recently I did a course, an online course offered by Thomson Foundation. It was on a guide on how to tell better stories about Africa. And I was wondering can I get a chance to write my articles for Thomson Foundation, or how can I even get to work with them?
So our editorial file is completely is run very, very independently, and it's something that we do take very seriously. I mean, because we have distribution on the Reuters Wire, to write for us, you need to become effectively a freelancer for the foundation. However, having said that, when we do run training courses, especially the long training courses that have some mentoring opportunities, we do work with journalists to produce stories. And at times, but I'll have to say it's rare, those stories get published on our website. In this case, will be Context, the new editorial product. However, we work with a lot of journalists that come to our training courses, especially those that come from either other news outlets. We make sure that their editors know that they are coming and that there is a willingness to publish those stories as a result, but also with freelance journalists. We've done this training course just last week in India, and we were training journalists on reporting modern day slavery. And we, as part of the second day, we got them together with a couple of NGOs that they were telling the story of one of the rescue missions that they just conducted. And these journalists wrote a fantastic story, and it was pitched. We helped them pitching the story, and it was published in the Times of India. So there is a lot that comes out of our training courses. But if you want, the normal iteration is not I take the course, I'll get to write for the Thomson Reuters Foundation News, simply because we distribute on Reuters, but also because a lot of our journalism approach right now is really focused on data. So we're really putting data at the center of our newsroom. I'm actually really reshaping completely our editorial approach. We only write knowing what our audience wants. So we're much, much more specific about the type of content that we write to make sure that, purpose-driven professionals can consume it and can actually take action based on the content that they read on our site. But it is possible to find publishers through our channels and through the training that we offer.
Okay, thank you. So our other two questions have already been answered. I mean, you've just answered Elizabeth's question. Now, Elizabeth asked in the chat, I would like my stories to be featured on Thomson Foundation. So you've given information on how freelance journalists can go about, working with you guys. And then also Joe Okumu, your question has been answered as well. Joe asked in the chat, does your organization work in Kenya? And of course, you said that you do a lot of work in Kenya. Mehmet, I see that you have a question in the chat as well. Is that a question you'd like to ask?
Yes, thank you so much. Antonio, thank you so much again for your very comprehensive presentation. On our session 1, we talked about freelance journalism. And one of the things that was discussed is legal safeguards for journalists who are reporting on different issues. And since they are freelancers, they don't have a team of or editorial or like a company that protects them with legal cases that they are sued. But at the same time, on the second session, when we talked about reporting from conflict and war zones, similar things, that sometimes journalists, especially freelance journalists, are targeted by governments. So in that sense, we have trust law, but I would appreciate, how, like the freelance journalists in our audience could, benefit from this trust law. If you can expand it a little bit more, I would appreciate.
Sure. So trust law serves NGOs and social enterprises. It doesn't really serve journalists and newsrooms. However, we are expanding trust law, and we are trying to create a legal support system for newsrooms and journalists at risk. So it's something that we just started. So when I took over the organization was very siloed, and trust law was only helping NGOs. But because of this media freedom work, we are constantly asked to support journalists at risk. One of the emerging areas, for example, for our type of support is supporting the Russia diaspora journalism community. So all these journalists that have fled Russia and are now trying to relocate in mostly across Europe, from Germany to Latvia, and they require immigration advice, they require visas, they require paperwork to open a bank account, and then they obviously require a complete set of retraining. So because we were helping Russian journalists in exile to effectively train up on digital platforms, I mean, these are journalists that were part of massive broadcast operations, and suddenly they are solo in front of a camera on their laptop trying to, garner an audience on YouTube. We actually realized they needed much more. And so we started really presenting and offering this support. So at the moment, I would say it's very much ad hoc. However, we are expanding this proposition. But I guess if you do have journalists that do need support, the best entry channel for this is the legal network for journalists at risk that I mentioned earlier. And you can find more about the initiative on the website called medialegalhelp.org. And then on medialegalhelp.org, which is what we call the legal network for journalists at risk, somebody from our team will pick up their request, and then the request will be channeled to over 17 organizations that support journalists at risk, precisely for legal issues. So anything that spans from pre-publication support, depending obviously on the jurisdiction, but also support in case of trial. So it's a comprehensive network of organizations. And that's why I describe this as a network of networks, because we don't get involved in defamation, we don't get involved in lawsuits, but there are others who do that. And so we believe that because we do have the pulse of a lot of freelance journalists around the world, we can act as a conduit to pass them and refer them into this network.
Thank you, Antonio. Thank you so much for that. We have two more questions. There's a lot of interest. People really want to know where Thomson Reuters Foundation works. So Nasser and Suad, you can ask your questions, or so Nasser, you can go first, and then Suad, you can go immediately afterwards. And then Antonio can answer because the questions are linked.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for your time and efforts. And thank you for your faithful presentations also. I see that you are working in Africa, in Bangladesh and Kenya and many other countries. I have just one question. If are you working in Morocco as well? Because I'm a journalist and I want to join your foundation, or just have or get some information and some background of information, background of knowledge about your foundation in Morocco.
Thank you for the question, Saad. Nasser, do you want to ask your question as well? Thanks, Saad.
Thank you, Antonio, for your very much lucid presentation. I think, and I saw in your presentation 2 pictures from Bangladesh events. I want to know from you, your organization is connected with Bangladesh journalists, or is any activities in Bangladesh?
So the answer, I guess, for Bangladesh is definitely yes. We have written extensive stories from Bangladesh. We don't have at the moment a full-time reporter in Bangladesh, but we write content from Bangladesh regularly on our website, which will be in a month time context.news, but until now is a website called news.trust.org, which will be paused in September when we launch the new product. We also work very closely with Professor Yunus. He spoke at our events multiple times. And then we have done legal research on legal issues in Bangladesh. I think we've done actually some work for Professor Yunus about the legality of some micro-lending in some other regions of the world. And then we've done work looking again at fair labor in the issue of Bangladesh. So in the country of Bangladesh. So yes, we've done actually significant activities in Bangladesh, less in Morocco, but we have reported from Morocco. We've done actually reporting for Morocco. I think we even done a consultancy for the National Wire Agency in Morocco. So we have, I think for me, it's easier to tell you where we don't work than when we work. And we don't work in Iran, we don't work in Saudi Arabia, and at the moment we don't work in mainland China.
I was going to suggest that, Antonio. I was going to say, can you please tell us rather where you don't work or where you are not working? Because, I mean, of course, being a journalist, you guys used to be called Reuters, and then Reuters used to be, of course, one of the world's biggest, well, it still is, I mean, one of the world's biggest news agencies. You know, like whenever you open a newspaper, there used to be like Reuters, and yeah, so Reuters is everywhere. Thomson's Reuters, you've got journalists and representation basically everywhere. So I think what's super important for us to talk about as well is the strengthening of journalism, you know, because that is essentially what you guys focus on a lot at the foundation, strengthening journalism. And I'd like to understand from you how you see Thomson Reuters in the big ecosystem. You know, you do so much, you know, we have other news organizations as well. I mean, so I'm phoning in from Seattle at the moment, and I'm based in the United States at the moment. And here, of course, there are big media companies, you know, whether you're talking CNN on TV, you're talking, you know, Associated Press, etc. And Thomson Reuters Foundation, talk to us about how you feel about the work you do in terms of strengthening journalism.
I think it's a big question. It's fascinating. It's what gets me out of bed every morning, and I try to be optimistic. And I'm not normally an optimistic type of person. I look at the glass half empty and I try to make it half full. But in general, I tend to see it half empty, and it's challenging because, you know, we've all seen the state of journalism right now. What worries me the most is the legal threats to journalism at the moment. My good friend Maria Ressa has become a popular name because of the Nobel Prize, but you know, even before that, she had 22 lawsuits. And what worries me about that, and actually Patricia Campos Melo, who will be at the conference in October, will tell her story as well, is that we've gone from a moment in a time where journalists were held accountable in terms of libel and defamation, which is good. I mean, journalism, it needs to be regulated. It needs to be principles in terms of what you write and how you write it. But the law is increasingly being weaponized, and we've seen a lot of journalists being accused of corruption, accused of money laundering, accused of taking money from foreign agencies. We've seen what's happening to Rana Ayyub in India, for example. So there is an increased weaponization of the law, which is not just morally wrong, but it risks bankrupting journalists and entire families, because once you receive 4 lawsuits for corruption in a country where the judiciary is not particularly independent, you're effectively at risk of, you know, your livelihood is at risk, your family livelihood is at risk. And there is also this idea that, you know, mud sticks. If a journalist is accused of 5 corruption charges, which are politically motivated, the journalist's reputation might be tarnished forever, even if spending significant amount of money or pro bono support, if he or she gets to have it, he or she gets to clear their reputation. So this is something that really keeps me awake at night, because one of your participants said, you know, I think it was you, Mehet, who said it, but you know, there are a lot of journalists who don't work as part of a big global newsroom with the chief counsel and an army of lawyers, and so they are easy prey to targets that want to silence them. So that's an issue that worries me. Another issue that worries me is the sustainability of media and the business models, which are completely broken. And only the big players such as the Times and the Washington Post and others internationally have really been able to monetize the new digital consumption trends. A lot of journalists, there's two things, I think. One, which is a lot of newsrooms don't have the capacity to invest in digital technologies. And unfortunately, we've gone and past the days where you take a story and you post it on Facebook. Nobody cares. That's not going to drive traffic to your website. So the tools are much more complicated. They require new professional figures to be embedded within the newsroom. We just created an audience team in our newsroom 2 years ago. And I keep on learning new things by just talking to them and understanding how complicated the whole SEO training and system is, and Google Analytics moving to GA4 and all this kind of stuff. So this is a full-time job. And so if you want to succeed at this, you need to make the investment, and some newsrooms cannot make the investment. On the other side, there is an issue about resistance from journalists, which is what really infuriates me the most, because I don't understand what the fear is all about. And the train has gone. So if you want to be a sustainable newsroom that has the opportunity to connect with audiences, unfortunately, you cannot think that you can write a story, press the button and publish it, because those days are gone, and they're not gone now. They were gone already 15 years ago. And even within my newsroom, I had to spend a lot of time in telling my journalists to go beyond the newswire. The newswire Reuters is great, is a B2B, we distribute to newsrooms of colleagues that I'm sure are on the call, but I wanted to know who was reading our stories. And when you are a newswire, it's virtually impossible. So the reason and the rationale behind Context is to create a digital first brand where we'll be able to know who's reading our stories, from where, what are they interested, how long do they stay on the page, what other stories they read, so that we can better communicate with our audiences. And unfortunately, I understand that journalists are not necessarily interested automatically in audiences. They are interested in having an audience read their stories, but because of the influx of information, the influx of the information has exploded, is available, that there is an overload of information. If you want to cut through the noise, you need to be able to find a different angle. Hence, we're calling it Context. We're positioning it as a second read that will give you context and analysis. You need to find your niche, you need to find your audience, and you need to die for your audience. Your audience is your gold mine. You cannot operate in a vacuum assuming that somebody somewhere, somehow, at some point will read your story. You need to know who your audience is, and you need to nurture that audience.
Thanks, Antonio. I think the beauty of the position that you are in is that you are able to get sort of the bird's eye view or the overview of the profession from so many different sources. It's really amazing, because you are tapping into a global network of different people working in different economies and different geographical spaces. And something that I think we need to understand, so I'm a journalist as well, and I think something we need to understand is that you talked about being frustrated with the journalists. We also need to understand our technology and the moment we are in journalism. So maybe speaking directly also to our participants and journalists, up and coming journalists who are on this panel. Do you want to talk to them specifically, and maybe talk about, the bird's eye view, like where are we going? What are the trends? What are the things that you think that the new journalists should be aware of, whether it's technology? You've mentioned quite a bit of it, but I'd like to speak to participants in a way that motivates them as well into the profession. I know it's another big question. You don't have to go into all of it, but I think certainly this whole idea, I was really surprised to hear that you guys are using TikTok, because a lot of people associate TikTok with dancing and little music videos and funny memes and those kind of things, but you're doing the serious work even on TikTok.
You cannot live in a vacuum. You cannot live with technology. Now, am I a big fan of Meta? Am I a big fan of some big technology giants? No, and in particular, I'm not, because of the issue of data rights. And I think we have zero control over our data. It's impossible to even cancel yourself, delete yourself from Instagram. We are commodified by tech companies. we're doing work on the issue of data rights through our journalism, but also through legal research, working with organizations such as Access Now. But you do need to work with them, because that is where the audience is. I mean, if you have kids, I don't have kids, but if you have kids of 12, 15, 13, ask them, well, maybe not 13, but 17, ask them where do they get the news from? And I doubt that anybody will tell you from broadcast news, from TV. Most of the answers will be from social platforms where they see that content. So TikTok, actually, I mean, even the BBC is doing a massive, very basic information to an audience. Look at it this way: if we don't do it, somebody else will occupy the space and will project their message. So it's important to give a message in a different medium, in another formula, to audiences that are in those communities. You asked about the future of technology. The future of technology is particularly interesting and even difficult to decode, but we are exploring the whole concept of Web3, which is something which has been pioneered by a number of techie, nerdy guys that see the future. One of them is a guy called Gavin Wood, who is one of the co-founders of Ethereum, who's now created an organization called Polkadot, which is effectively exploring Web3 applications. And Web3 is a vision of the internet that is completely decentralized, where everybody owns their data. Data is owned, monetized by the user, and it's portable. And at the moment, most of Web3 technology, which is effectively blockchain technology, is known by us because of Bitcoin. And by the way, a lot of misconceptions around Bitcoin. You know, everybody still thinks that Bitcoin is for drug dealers, terrorists, and pollutes the environment. It does pollute the environment, but much less than actually is understood and perceived. And actually, there is entire economies like El Salvador right now that actually are running on Bitcoin, and cryptocurrencies have significant advantages when it comes, especially to stabilize currencies in countries where there are significant fluctuations in the state fiat. So there are interesting applications that are emerging when it comes to blockchain, and some of those applications actually will affect journalism. An interesting example is with blockchain, you are able to, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the concept of blockchain, but it's effectively a certification through blocks that are certified and are part of a chain. And if you break this chain, the whole process is basically sends a red flag. So it's impossible to break the chain. So if this process is it's mostly used in applications that are mostly DeFi, so decentralized finance. I don't know if you have a Revolut card, these are run on blockchain. But it's also increasingly used in supply chain to effectively articulate the origin of a specific good, because it's tracked across the blockchain and is certified across the blockchain. Now, the same principle could be applied, for example, to the origin of a picture shot in Ukraine. And you will remember how, the beginning of the conflict, there were a lot of issues around the origin and the origin of source of pictures in Ukraine were disputed. The Russians were saying that those pictures were coming from Syria, and it wasn't what's happening on the ground in Ukraine. Now, if you do adopt, for example, blockchain to geolocate a picture and to certify that the picture has been shot at that specific time in that specific zone, there could be really interesting applications. But we are at very, very, very early days in the use of blockchain technology for journalism. But if I had to put a bet, I would imagine that in 15 years' time, we'll have a very, very, very different conversation.
Thank you. Thanks, Antonio. Chemre has a question. Chemre, please feel free to ask the question.
Thank you, Yazid. Thank you so much, Antonio. That was a very informative and inspiring session. It's a great asset for you to be with us today. My question really goes back to the TRFilter. I was going to ask about the, if not confidential, top 3 countries where you receive the most harassments from. But listening to your remarks, I just realized it might be fairly new, as it's a newly released application. But this is a very tangible initiative with concrete results. So I am going to ask instead if you have any future plans to share the stats of TRFilter as a report, because we have so many organizations monitoring, reporting on human rights violations that especially women journalists are combating in the field on the front lines. But I believe this is a very distinct and unique output that would serve best to the rest of the humanity, if you would have any plans to share the results.
Thank you. So the top 3 countries, so remember the filter is a tool that works in English only. So the top 3 countries, I guess, unsurprisingly, are in terms of adoption at the moment, I'm looking at the stats right now, are US, UK, and India, and then Canada. But the map of adoption, it's very, very, very widely spread. In some countries, we have 2 sessions. I mean, we had, for example, 1 session in Oman. We had 1 session in Burkina Faso. But then there are obviously other countries in which we're seeing regular sessions every day. Brazil, for example, surprisingly, was one of the top countries. Obviously, they are a Portuguese-speaking country. The plans that I have in mind, and it's very difficult to talk about the plans because I have a very specific vision for this tool, but it will depend on adoption. I really would love for us, once we have a widespread adoption of the tool, so I really hope you can help us in spreading the word around filter, would be to then produce a heat map of harassment around the world based on our tool. So we will say we had this year, I don't know, 10,000 sessions, and these 10,000 sessions are coming from these countries, and these are the hotspots of online harassment right now in terms of the reports that have been produced. And then I would love to use our legal team to help me producing legal frameworks that they can then help journalists that are in those countries to navigate the environment and understanding how they can get help, what can they do to actually get help. So we'll roll the tool out in Arabic. That will be obviously a different set of data. We will be starting from Lebanon. But I guess for you on this call, it would be fascinating if you could give us a hand, because obviously I don't want the report to be skewed in terms of methodology by the fact that, there is 5,000 users in the US and 2 in Kenya, because obviously that methodologically will not stand. So the widest possible adoption for now is the goal. And then ideally reports. And my dream is to produce a yearly report that looks at the heat map of online harassment to start the conversation and to have those governments basically thinking that if they end on that report, they really need to get their act together.
Mm-hmm. And thank you so much for the response. And we do have a wide range of international intergovernmental organizations in our network that we collaborate, and of course our global partners from 24 different countries. So we would love to contribute in any possible means to the foundation, to the TRFilter, and especially given the crackdown of press freedom and independency, most importantly in Turkey, and we have a special focus on monitoring Turkey as well in terms of different human rights violations. I know so many of the media organizations, NGOs, would be very glad to contribute in sharing resources in any possible way. So I would love to stay in touch for that too. Absolutely. Thank you so much for the answer, though.
Pleasure.
Yeah, and Antonio, you also have such amazing partners on this TRFilter project. I mean, Twitter and, global, you've got global partners as well that can help you further your reach, which is awesome. And also, here's the thing. So, the English-speaking world or countries with predominantly English-speaking populations might start adopting this, but harassment is global, unfortunately. And people sitting anywhere in the world can start attacking a Twitter account. And so, yeah, I mean, this heat map would definitely be interesting to even look at where the abuse emanates from, but yeah, it sounds like a very interesting project, and we'll definitely follow it. Let's just go back to the chat just to make sure that we're answering everyone's question. Sorry. So Mehmet, you have another question or a comment? Is it a question? Let's see.
That's a question, actually. When I listen to your presentation, I'm so glad to know that human rights is one of the 3 focus areas for the Thomson Reuters Foundation. And we also, as the JWF, focus on human rights as one of the 3 mandates. And we also believe that journalists are human rights defenders. So from that sense, we know that there are many countries in the world where hundreds of thousands of journalists are jailed because of their journalism. And sometimes when we speak to freelance journalists or students who are interested in pursuing a career in journalism, they are discouraged because of these jailing of the journalists. So what do you advise to freelance journalists or journalism students to stand strong and carry on this job?
It's a tough one. My advice would be to get support and get support at the right time. So I would say don't chicken out, but don't also try to be brave for the sake of being brave. So be alert to the level of risk that you face, and be smart, get support when you think that you need support, right? If you're a good journalist, if you're dealing with something that is problematic. And if you're dealing with something that is problematic, there is help out there. At times it's not easy to find. And that's why, again, we created a legal network for journalists at risk. And that's why we call it media legal help, because people will be able to remember. So get these channels. Somebody in the network will know somebody who can help you, or who can help you getting helped. And be alert. I guess the best advice is just, as any other profession, there are risks. This is obviously becoming a riskier profession every day. That shouldn't discourage you as long as you know the rules of engagement. And the rules of engagement are more problematic than they were a couple of years ago. But I think if you're a good journalist, if you are dealing with something that is problematic, and at that point, don't chicken out, but not necessarily don't pretend to be Iron Man either. Get help. And then hopefully you'll be able to publish your story, or hopefully you'll be able to get some other level of support. And there'll be times, I think, where you won't be able to publish your story. And then at that point, you need to assess what you want to do, whether you want to change profession, whether you want to change country, whether you want to stay in risk. They are very personal choices and decisions, right? Because it does depend on many, many factors, on your family, on your personal circumstances. Some journalists are perfectly happy to relocate, leave their country and continue their career somewhere else. Others can't do it, or they won't do it. So it's a tricky one. But I think I would start by saying get help at the right time.
Yes, can I just add one comment?
Yeah, absolutely, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that with Antonio. In our prior session, we hosted Isabel Koshil, the correspondent of The Guardian, reporting from Ukraine. And I'm really glad that you gave the same advice as she did in a session before. She also said that it's very important to evaluate the risks and the situations in the best sense to make sure that you sustain your life, you're alive to continue reporting. So you touched upon very similar points. So we do get this understanding that our personal security priorities is at most important in order to sustain our reporting and to continue our contributions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the main goal for us as journalists is actually to stay alive so we can continue telling the stories, right? We don't want to be in a situation where, unfortunately, we're so at risk that our very life ends. And we have, of course, many examples, unfortunately, of that as well, where journalists' lives were taken because of the job. So I think it's important to remember as well that we live and work in an ecosystem. Antonio has mentioned a number of resources. Isabel has mentioned a number of resources in a previous session. There are organizations like the Committee to Protect Journalists. There is an ecosystem of support for us as journalists. And I think all participants, go back to the videos after our sessions have concluded and, draw up a list for yourself as well of resources that you can tap into, particularly, where you are, closer to your home even, and of course, globally as well. We have participants from around the world, literally different continents, and measures of journalism freedom is different in every part of the world, but try to access those resources as well that can help strengthen your work as a journalist. So we are almost done with today's session. I just want to check if there's any other questions. Please feel free to let us know. And of course, when you do get on the call to ask a question, please just introduce yourself and where you're from. But But Antonio, so you are based in Sicily at the moment, you said, headquartered out of London, as you mentioned. And yeah, in terms of your work now, COVID and journalism, are things stabilizing for you guys? Are you going back to Canary Wharf, or will you still be working out in Italy?
Yeah, I will be going back to London in September. I'm working out of Italy for the rest of the month, and then I'm taking 2 weeks off, but I'll be back in London in September.
Yeah, I mean, COVID I was reporting during COVID in South Africa, where I'm from, and I mean, COVID was such a curveball for all of us, and with journalism as well, you know. So I don't know if there are any other questions. I think there was a lot of information and people might still be digesting the information. Some good resources that were mentioned today, of course, in the chat, there are links to the websites, different links. Big takeout here is a new tool, TRFilter. If you are online and you want to test it, do download TRFilter. But I think we have 2 minutes left, so I think we can start wrapping up and then we can end on time today. Mehmet and Cemre, is there anything you want to say in closing? And maybe we can welcome Antonio also to make some closing remarks.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to thank Antonio for sharing his time with us and for his presentation, which was very helpful and resourceful. I would like to remind all the participants that this video is recorded, and we will edit and publish all these sessions on the jwfacademy.org, so you can revisit the website, you can watch it again, and if you would like to learn about the resources again, so it will be published on the website as well. So we are going to provide some summary of the event, some resources that are shared by our speakers. So that will be very helpful for you. And also, feel free to share the link for the JWF Academy with your other colleagues or friends who are interested in journalism, so they can go ahead, watch the webinars and sessions. So I just wanted to share with you. And also, Antonio, I would like to ask, is it possible if you can share your presentation on our website for those who would like to see it again?
Perhaps not on the website, but yes, to participants to this forum. Yeah, we tend not to share those presentations just because we don't want people to we don't want to lose control of how it's used, simply because there's nothing confidential. We just don't want our slides to end up in the hands of someone that might want to use or change them or plagiarize them. That's the only reason why.
Great, thanks so much for giving this information. Yes, and finally, for Antonio, we know that Thomson Reuters Foundation provides, a ton of resources for journalists and NGOs worldwide, and we would like to carry on our mandate to provide, webinars, workshops for journalists, not globally, but we would like to do this, by continents, like Africa, for South Asia, for Latin America, and we would like to work in closer collaboration with you and the Thomson Reuters Foundation. And thank you so much for your support and help. And Cemre, would you like to say anything before we wrap it up?
Not much. I think we took a great advantage of Antonio being here with our questions, comments. Thank you so much. That was a great pleasure to get to know your expertise in depth. Thank you.
Great. And a final reminder for next week, the next session, session 5 will be on Wednesday, and we will have 2 amazing speakers from Foreign Press Association, the president of the Foreign Press Association, and also we have a UN correspondent from the United Nations Correspondents Association, and we will be talking about their programs and activities. We look forward to seeing you in the next session. So thank you so much. And I'll give it back to you, Yazid, for your final remark.
Yeah. Antonio, is there anything you want to say before you go back to work? This is part of work, right? Is there anything else you want to say?
No, I'm just going to go back to the rest of my work. So thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
And stay in touch.
Ciao.
Ciao.